So I'm going to start the session and welcome and thank you for being with us. You know, I know that for some of you it's early, Warren, and for the rest of us it's European time. So it's almost, you know, the time where we're going on, but we're going to have this interesting discussion. I know that in the audience we have a lot of people, you know, expecting to us, you know, to give some answer or some direction for the future trend, which is seaweed bioplastic. And so around this table, I have a few friends and people that I really appreciate. And before jumping into the presentation, I'm going to give the floor to Isabel. So Isabel is the CEO, the chairwoman of Seaventure Partners. She's a friend, you know, we've been, you know, working together for the last 16 years. I really appreciate her work. I really appreciate her vision. She's an enthusiast. And each time I'm trying to bring a new case to Isabel, she's challenging me on the essence of, you know, the project, which is good. So I'm going to give the floor for Isabel, you know, to setting up, you know, the session. And I will start, you know, the session with each of you introducing yourself and jumping into the conversation if you agree with that. Is that okay? And just a last comment, if you don't speak, put your mic on mute to avoid, you know, the background noise. Okay, Isabel, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello. Thanks a lot to BioMarine to invite me to this session. I'm absolutely delighted to be here for this fascinating session on seaweed for bioplastic. So I guess that you've had excellent talk before on other topic, but now we're focusing on bioplastic altogether. My name is Isabelle de Crémaux, as Pierre said, and I'm the CEO and the managing partner of a venture capitalist based in Paris, and we also have offices in 5 other European countries, as well as in East Coast US for a short while. So Seaventure is investing in financing in innovative company around the world, from seed stage to IPO stage. And currently we have about 900 million euros under management, and we have different verticals of funds. I'll come to the seaweed for bioplastic in a minute, but just to set up the context and to show you the investor perspective, why to invest specifically in bioplastic from seeds. The different verticals that we are currently focusing on are dedicated to health, food, nutrition, digital health, sport and wellness, feed and animal health, fintech and retail tech, and last but not least, a recent fund that we just raised dedicated to blue economy, and that we just raised with Pierre from Pierre Aves. So why blue economy? Well, when a venture capitalist start to invest in a specific field like bioplastic, seaweed, or blue economy more generally, it's because it successfully raised funds for itself from investors that are trusting its capacity to identify, select, and negotiate good deals in this specific field, and so that the investors also trust him or her to invest in companies that will find their way not only in having good science, transforming the good science into good products, and then finding their way accessing the market. And for us, until very recently, the blue economy was too early in the sense that the access to market was fragmented and difficult to find, and the science was not progressed enough to give commercially viable cost of goods. This has recently changed, and we're now assessing and convinced that it is the right timing for small and medium companies to actually be in that segment and be successful in that segment. So why blue economy? Very obviously, because it's the best leverage on climate change and sustainability, because the main markets in blue economy that we're investing in, which are bioplastic, biopackaging, food, feed, aquaculture, hydrogen, and remediation, are now very hype, generating excellent goodwill value for acquisition and listing on public market, because there is a growing and tremendously deep deal flow in this blue economy, and we are reviewing currently a few dozens of company in specifically the seaweed area. The market have matured, as I said, and the understanding and the awareness of the investors community is now mature enough for this segment being structured in finding the go-between between startup and medium companies that are raising funds and investors. Coincidentally, today, Inside Packaging actually released the November issue focusing on the topic of how seaweed is set up to shape the future in packaging. And I recommend the lecture of it to the audience. So why are we, especially as an investor, attracted to invest in seaweed in bioplastic? It's for many reasons, such as the fact that the seaweed, as was previously said during the day, was self-growing without the need of pesticides and fertilizers, because it grows much faster than other plants, and especially trees, when it deals with paper and cardboard replacement. And of course, we remember as investors, because we're old enough to remember that many bioplastic startups have actually failed, and many microalgae did fail as well. But we think that the only reasons why they failed is that it was too early for them. So currently, and that's really what triggered the interest of an investor like we are, it's when the push from the science actually the pull from the market demand at the very same time, which is the case right now. So naturality, sustainability is the key words, and to set up the scene of these sessions, I also, of course, recommend that you read the publication from FAO published in 2018, as well as the publication from the European Journal of Phycology published in October 2017, focusing especially on bioplastic produced by seaweeds.
Thank you very much, Isabelle, for this nice introduction. And so it gives us, the ground, for future exchange and debates. So I'm going to go around the clock, and I'm going to ask very shortly, because we're going to have, the time, to come back on what you're doing, especially, regarding seaweed bioplastic. But I'm going to go with Warren. Warren, you in Canada, in Calgary. Can you introduce yourself in a nutshell? You're on mute. Much better.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much, Pierre, and thank you so much for having me here. And it's great to be among such great people on this panel. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. My name is Warren Dowd. I'm founder and managing director of BioMarine Capital. We formed this company in stealth a little while ago to look at specifically the seaweed economy and the blue economy. My background is I'm a 25-year venture capitalist, primarily working in renewables. And Isabelle hit a point earlier that was quite sensitive to me, which was jumping into markets early. I've been involved in hydrogen for over 20 years. So we were much too early back then. We backed a few Canadian companies you've probably heard of, Ballard Power and General Hydrogen. But now things have changed. So it's good to hear that your perspective on seaweed and the blue economy has changed as well, Isabelle. So yes, I've worked in many different areas in renewables. I'm interested in the plant-based economy as well. I'm a vegan as well, so I love. I did a lot of research on the space and looked at the trends in institutional capital availability, of which Isabelle was part of, and realized that there was a convergence between society's requirements and our global requirements and capital. And
you're going to spoil my next question, Warren. So we're going to stop here.
Okay.
you know me because I wanted you to go back to the seaweed industry, so I must stop him. If you give him the floor, it's going to be a big challenge for me to handle him. So next in line, Anne-Sophie. I know you for not so long, but I've been impressed by what you told me. And so can you make also in a nutshell a quick introduction and tell us more about the sovereign fund?
Absolutely. So my name is Anne-Sophie Winter Hansen, and I have a background as an entrepreneur and also working with green transition in Maersk, and then as a venture capitalist as well. Currently, I'm with the Danish Sovereign Wealth Fund, and we have quite a lot of different mandates. We look into many different sectors, but we are having an increasingly green approach to several of our investments. It's high on the agenda for the Danish government, as well as many other governments around the world. So it's an area that's really developing quite fast. From a seaweed perspective, I think it's so interesting that plants originated in oceans, and then when they came on land, it took them a couple of 100 million years to figure out how to build lignines so they could stand up and be upright plants on land as well as in the sea. And this means that some of the very old organisms on this planet originates from the sea, also from the plant world. And there's just so many interesting molecules and genes and enzymes and everything else to be found. I think from a plastic perspective, it's something that we as humans invented somewhat recently, but it's becoming an increasing problem. So it's a really interesting challenge to tackle. When I was at Maersk, we worked quite a lot with the ocean cleanup in order to pilot the trash collection system in the Pacific Ocean, and it's something that's close to my heart and also quite interesting from an entrepreneurial perspective, I think.
Thank you, Anne-Sophie. So the next one is Thuy, and Thuy and myself, we're sharing the same background. I used to be a marine geologist. She's coming from the field as well, and she's now into finance. But Thuy, the floor is yours. Can you introduce yourself? You're on mute. No, you're still on mute, Thuy. You need to click on the mic at the bottom of the screen. Can you see it? No, you're still on mute. So
take the lead while you.
Yes, we're gonna. Oh, well, Thuy, if it's not working, log off and log in again. It happened, to me, and I'm gonna give, in between, I'm gonna give the floor to Vivek.
Okay, I get the hint. Here I am. Thanks, Pierre, and really nice to meet everybody on the panel. I'm normally based in Switzerland. It's just that today I'm traveling I'm in Copenhagen today, and I'll be meeting with Anne-Sophie later in the evening. Thanks for getting me onto the panel. I'm really happy to be here. So I started my career as a beer salesman in Singapore, mostly Asia markets, mostly commercial roles. With a variety of companies, mostly in and around alcohol beverages, including the Heineken Group, later with Red Bull, and more recently with Diageo. And sometime around, let's say, late 2007 is when I arrived to Europe to, in Switzerland. For me, it was always a country that you visit in the summer to look at the lakes and the mountains, but I never thought Switzerland would become my adopted home. So I joined Nestle at the headquarters, initially in the area of innovation acceleration, and continued under the corporate R&D structure of Nestle in a variety of roles in strategic innovation partnerships, academic partnerships, and more recently working with startups and external accelerators, also helping build the internal incubator and accelerator programs. So that brought me into contact with the venture industry in general. And sometime around this time last year, I jumped ship to move to the other side of the table and to be part of a fund, which it stands for the European Circular Bioeconomy Fund. So the C and the B, the circular and bioeconomy, are the key parts of what the name is. And it's coming really a bit from the EU Green Deal with the EIB, the European Investment Bank, as the cornerstone investor. So I'm still based in Switzerland. The management team is headquartered in Bonn in Germany. We are a pan-European fund with team members also located in France, Spain, Netherlands, and Finland as things stand. We invest more typically in late Series A, early Series B, and bioeconomy is really the core theme, but this would include things around food tech, ag tech, biomaterials for packaging, and also specialty chemicals. But I think from my own food and beverage experience, and then more recently with the FMCG industry, a bit in the spotlight for the pollution being created in the environment through packaging, it really brings the convergence of science, food, and packaging. So seaweed, today's topic is about bioplastic, but it's also an marine source is also is so under the radar at the moment, but more will come in terms of the blue economy as a source for the alternate proteins. So I think this convergence of food and packaging together is really hot, and the sector will really grow with a variety of, and there's room for a lot of players. Startups, institutional investors, as also venture investors, plus also the corporates who need to partner. So long story short, that's a bit where I am. I'm very excited to be in this, let's say, sweet spot of seaweed-led bioplastic, the topic for today.
Thank you, Vivek. Nice introduction. So, Tui.
Hello.
You are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well. Loud and clear.
Perfect. Technical issues sometimes. It happens. So hello, everyone, and thanks for having me to this exciting panel. So my name is Tui. Actually, I joined Total Energies 15 years ago, and I spent my first 10 years in engineering, especially in reservoir engineering for geoscience side of Total Energies. And then I recently joined Total Energy Ventures, which is the VC arm of our company. So our target today is to identify and invest in high potential startups that directly contribute to a low carbon future. We also invest directly in the funds. And the sector we are interested today are strategic to us. It will be electricity, renewable energies, storage, smart energy. We also invest in new mobility to anticipate what would be the mobility of tomorrow. And we started already with the EV side. We look at hydrogen as well with a lot of interest. And what I can say is that today we need to also anticipate what will be the future of our activity. So how are we going to recycle all our footprint in terms of a solar panel, in terms of batteries, in terms of plastics that we are going to produce. And that's why we start to look at the circular economy very closely to try to define what will be the new circular value chain of tomorrow. And bio-based, for sure, is one topic of interest. We know that historically we look at it for the biofuels purpose, more or less with success. And that's how we started to look at the algae and microalgae, but more than 10 years ago. Today, I think that bioplastic has a big momentum, and we look at plastic recycling, but also bio-based plastics.
And thank you, Tui, for this introduction. And so we're going to start, to dive into, the seaweed kelp forest. And I'm going to give, the floor again to Warren. But Warren, I would like you to explain from a business point of view, what is the advantage of using seaweed in bioplastic, and what are the promises of this future, I would say, raw material in terms of capability, in terms of market. So can you wrap up, for our audience in no time, the beauty of seaweed in terms of bioplastic?
Is that you telling me nicely to be quick? Okay, I will be quick. When we started doing research on the space, it became clear there were players in the bioplastic space with seaweed that could create products that were biodegradable quickly, and that I found to be very exciting. Obviously, there's in a market that's this new, there's going to be bottlenecks, and obviously in some of the earlier sessions, they talked about having access to raw material. That number one needs to be solved. Part of the entire value chain needs to be looked at, but I think that after we've started to talk to some of the companies out there and the opportunities for grow, we think that that can be scaled reasonably quickly, and we're actively working on that. So to answer your question directly, Pierre, the excitement to me is having a product that can initially replace products such as food containers, etc., and start to chip away at the plastics, the traditional plastics industry. And the way to do that is to find a polymer that can be injected into traditional molding plastic production. That number one needs to be paramountly important, as well. Costs. You need to be able to do this without adding $1 per item. And I think what we're seeing, what excites me, is that there's some groups out there. We've been working with Solo Blue, and I like the way that polymer has been created to not only be scaled, but also to breathe and continue and expand the shelf life. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so we discussed, a few points, during the previous session, and it's somehow, complicated for startup, to envisage, scaling up. So we're going to come back to this because it's an important topic, for discussion with investors. So let me ask, Thuy, because Thuy is representing the oil and gas industry, and I understand the connection because in the previous session we had the oil and gas is the largest biorefinery in the world. So we see how, if we can convince the oil and gas to jump into the seaweed industry, we can see and we can anticipate how fast we can move forward. But what is the baseline for your fund, Thuy, and how did you come up, with the idea that seaweed bioplastic could be an interesting trend for your investment fund?
Well, in terms of bioplastics, we started the adventure a few years ago by creating a joint venture with Corbion. We also launched a first plant in Thailand since 2018, and now we envisage actually to scale also in France with a first plant with a conversion of a refinery in Grand Puy by 2024. It will be a huge project with other renewables product. Sorry, my son wants to pop up in the panel as well. And so in terms of bioplastics from seaweed, the advantage that we can see today is for sure the carbon sequestration, and that can improve for sure the life cycle analysis of the end product that you are going to have. Now, the big challenge that we faced until today is how can we scale that at industrial volumes, because we really need to produce at high scale in order to make it economical. And seaweed for us could be an answer to that. We can see that 70% of the surface of the earth is made of water, and so for sure we see there a high potential. Moreover, we have been exploiting a lot of fields in the offshore, and we think that in terms of technical background, we can also bring something in that space.
Yeah, very good. And well, I have plenty of questions for you, and we're going to dig more into this. But Vivek, so we understand that the European Circular Blue Fund that you're part of is more focusing on climate issues and sustainability. But your background demonstrates that you've been very close, to the seaweed industry and the bioplastic. So what do you think the chances are, for this industry to grow, to become mature, and to bring some interesting case to the market? What is your view on that?
Yeah, in my view, it's really a bit of convergence. Where do you find things could really work is where there is a commercial application. It has to be commercially viable. Will consumers pay, let's say, maybe initially a premium on a material which is kind of new to the world? Two, will the financials make sense for an investor? Where would the margins be? Three, is the technology really there? There's one thing to say it's at a lab scale, you're creating a few things at a lab scale, moving to a pilot plant, but finally as it scales up, then all these issues of supply chain, from where it would come the material, will it stand the test of, let's say, high speed machining on it in terms of packaging? The regulatory aspect of, can it be in food contact? It's packaging, it's bioplastic, but for which applications? And of course, the most important element is still the sustainability. It's a nice sustainability story to tell, but will the other elements fit in? Will consumers pay a premium? Will the machinability of the material work for food industry in general, or for personal care as other aspects? So this is what I think will have to come together: the commercial aspect, financial sense, financial business case, aspects around the supply chain, and then of course the sustainability story is extremely important. So I think as it moves from a lab to a pilot plant to an real industrial scale, that's where the challenge would come about. But we are happy to partner and find the right opportunities that can come, make it reality in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years at scale.
Okay, perfect. Anne-Sophie, Denmark is a green country. It's a maritime country, and Denmark has a very special, I'd say, outermost territory, which is called Greenland. So it's a virgin territory with huge potential in terms of seaweed and developing, because of climate change, this new type of industry. So how do you foresee being part of a sovereign fund, and which goal is also to accelerate and develop the potential of the country? How do you foresee this trend? Is it something that is just an emerging trend in Denmark? Is it more mature? Do you consider the seaweed industry and the plastic as a side effect of the aquaculture and the fisheries that you are mastering? What are your thoughts on this?
That's a broad question. Let me start close to home. So Denmark is traditionally, in many aspects, an agricultural country. And we've focused a lot on animal husbandry for the past 120 years. And one of the things that we've noticed for marine aquaculture is the bioremediation potential that you have, not only from seaweed, but also from mussels and other organisms that filter water. And it's actually something that we're looking quite extensively into. On the seaweed side in Denmark, I'd say that we're primarily seeing different food items, fast-moving consumer goods, a little bit of cosmetics, not so much in industrial scale yet. But I think that also ties together with the geographical location and the sea depth around Denmark. Now, as you mentioned, we have quite a close relationship with Greenland, as well as with the Faroe Islands. And both geographies are really, really interesting when it comes to these offshore resources and the development of the same. I think for the Faroe Islands, there's been quite a lot of activity already in seaweed farming, and something that in my previous job as an entrepreneur, we looked into the research potential also of some of these projects. And the bioremediation potential is just fantastic, because you can clean up so many nutrient streams that come from land. So that's one part. Secondly, as has been mentioned already here today, it's a renewable biomass. So it regenerates over time. And if you are situated somewhere with a stable climate and sea temperature like the Faroe Islands, that's smack in the middle of the Gulf Stream, you can have quite a number of harvests during the year. And then finally, it's seaweed is such an interesting resource for fermentation, because a lot of the challenges with second generation bioethanol and other fermentation practices has been the lignines, and you don't find that in seaweed. So there's such great potential there. Well, not to the same extent, at least. And as for Greenland, they have a different seasonality than the Faroe Islands, but it's such a vast area and a beautiful country. I was there recently for another project, not seaweed related, I'm afraid. They don't have a lot of aquaculture so far, but there's a lot of interest, and we see quite a lot of budding entrepreneurs there who would like to start engaging in production of different types of offshore resources, including seaweed.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to think, from your investor point of view, and say, well, would it be possible now to consider, the seaweed industry as a relevant industry? And what are the key assets of this seaweed for bioplastic elements that you're looking for? And who would like to start? Maybe Isabel. You're on mute, Isabel. You're still on mute. So I think that you have to log off and come back. And I'm going to ask you this question to Tui. Because if you can't, go back to normal, you have to log off, Isabel, and come back. Tui? We're all on mute. Can we unmute? No? What's wrong? So keep the mic normal to avoid the mute. So Vivek, can you answer?
Maybe just repeat it if you can.
Well, from an investor point of view, what are the key driver that are interesting for you in terms of investment, potential investment, and what do you see as the main bottlenecks? Refraining from investing in seaweed bioplastic companies, and what are the key assets?
I think the main thing at the moment, and this is kind of, let's say, as a category, is to grow. So at the moment, it's really the technology and the technical differentiation, number one. As you know, and not all seaweed is the same. So which part and what can it be applied on, the machinability aspect, and what else needs to be added for it to work in terms of a packaging solution. And then, is this technology protected? Are there patents filed? Can it then be scaled up at an industrial level? This is really the key aspect. And then when you look at things which would then be close to the consumer, of course, we have a bit of a European view here with the panel, but we understand stuff here. We understand few things in Asia, Indonesia as an example, 13,000 islands. So where is that marine economy? And finally, what would be the entire supply chain? Where would the mass be made available? Where it would be machined? Where would it be put together? And where the application would be. So if there's too much of a disparity between sourcing and application, it will not be too viable. So it has to be close to where the thing would be consumed. I think this is a key aspect, because we are talking of carbon neutral or even carbon negative, but if it's going to add long supply chains and distances and things have to move, then it kind of defeats the very purpose in a way.
Yeah, I don't think this is exactly this, but we will come back. This is an important topic. Isabel, what will make you, choose a seaweed bioplastic company, and what are, the key question mark, on your side?
Without surprising you, in the bioplastic seaweed area, as in any other area, team, and team first.
Okay.
So the team managing the project is really absolutely essential in any circumstances. But when it relates specifically to seaweed bioplastic, the key question for us is, will the project, unless the project is already at a commercial stage, but if it's still at a development stage, will this project achieve commercially viable cost of good when it reaches market? And at the date when it reaches market, will those cost of goods be competitive to the competitors which would have made progress until then? So cost of good is really the essence for us. And then to prove or to justify the anticipated cost of good, then we would look at the yield, at the science, at the IP, I mean, at all the scientific backgrounds behind the cost of good. And the question that Vivek said, which is the supply chain and to be close to the supply chain and to get the consumer, is essential as well for sustainability. Yes.
And Warren, with the two hats that you're carrying, because you're talking with the investor and you bring investment to companies, but you're also helping in companies, to find the right investment. So what will be, the key restriction you see and you anticipate, when you're pitching, in front of your investor network? What are their requirements?
Well, I think everyone touched on probably the most important points. Management, number one. Can the team execute? There's obviously the logistical requirements of sufficient biomass supply. That's fundamental. Strong IP, patents is another part of it. This is a brand new industry, and the ones that are out there with the strongest IP have probably a fairly good chance. But then taking that intellectual property in terms of technical scalability, as Vivek has mentioned, can it run through these machines at high speed and not break down? And then once you've achieved that technical scalability, I mean, everyone's going to want to know, well, how much more do I have to pay for this product? I think there are areas in the plastics business that you can charge an extra 5 cents a container if it's grapes or cheese or something that, everyone knows. You go into a different superstore or supermarket and 5 cents on $10 grapes is not going to make a big difference, particularly to a consumer who believes that they're doing their part by buying something that's 100% biodegradable, and potentially keeping the food a little bit longer. So, I mean, that's a whole world out there. There's going to be plastics that this technology is not going to reach quickly because it's very difficult to compete with the current plastic. But I think there's niches where it begins, and I think that some of the investors out there, that's what they're looking for, is that initial traction.
And Thuy, from the Total Energy Venture Fund point of view, do you see the synergies with your expertise in different fields like oil and gas as a key vector, for development or investment? Is it something that you take into account? Because we know that seaweed bioplastic is linked, to the capability of biorefinery. So how do you target, your future investment in that field?
Well, it's true that future investment in that field are quite challenging for venture because in general, it's a very long cycle development. It's usually also high capex intensive. In that way, I think that Total Energy can be a strategic partner because we know that kind of industry. So it's not only a financial support, it's also knowing how to scale some project at industrial volumes. We can also offer access to a wide range of scientists and engineers that we have in-house. I guess that all our R&D program now work a lot with a lot of external research centers worldwide. And I think that having also access to that knowledge in this sector can also help to have some synergies and to duplicate that in the seaweed sector, for instance.
So, Anne-Sophie, we understand that the market is very fragmented because we have mainly startups at this stage. What will be the role of a sovereign fund to accelerate and maybe to relocate, some of the companies in your countries, in Faroes Island or Greenland or Denmark? Does it make sense, for you to consider that as a key vehicle, for accelerating the national development in this industry? How do you foresee that?
I think it would, and I also think part of our job as the Sovereign Wealth Fund, I'd like to just premise by saying we are a regional fund, so we fund companies within our geography, so Denmark, Faroe Islands, and Greenland. But we always look at scalability, as has been mentioned, I think, by all the panelists by this point. So a potential to continue developing the company, the production growth method, whatever it is, on an international scale. And we really like to co-invest also with international investors. So what we often see is that companies locally will perhaps contact us early on in their commercial journey and start building a relationship. In many cases, we may invest, and over time, as they scale towards becoming international companies, then they'll start relying more and more on foreign capital. So that's at least one way that a sovereign wealth fund can play a role, and in this case, one with some geographical limitations.
Okay. In the previous discussion, we understood that there are many sectors where the seaweed bioplastic can play a role. We know that it's very diversified, but the technology that is required and the R&D is not exactly the same. Tui mentioned the effort in terms of capex. We're going to touch base on this, but so far, most of the seaweed, they are coming from Southeast Asia with a heavy, problem, which is heavy metal pollution, pesticide, hormones. So most of the suppliers, they are looking for organic seaweed production. And knowing very well the topic, we have only a maximum of, let's say, 5,000 hectares that has been cultivated so far in organic seaweed, totally organic seaweed. So the key challenge will be how we're going to accelerate, this potential if we want to scale up, the seaweed industry. So how do you anticipate, the potential for these startups, and what will be the main bottleneck if they come to you, they say, well, I have this amazing polymer, but we need you to produce more seaweed. What will be your reaction? And we would like to start with this one. It's
I can pick up,
Yeah.
and then pass it on maybe to someone.
Absolutely. Yeah, you go first.
Yeah. I think this talks towards the scalability, and depending on the growth method, if it's microalgae and it can be produced either on land or in controlled environments, that's of course one thing. But if it's organic macroalgae, then from an investment perspective, you would really like to see a team that understands just at least the basics of marine spatial planning, these national zones, and how to interact with local governments in order to secure rights, or to interact with companies who know exactly how to do that in order to secure the supply chain. Because it's definitely a challenge when you have a promising polymer, promising product, and you're fully focus on developing this part and forget the supply chain that other companies might snap up the resources required to actually scale your business.
Yeah, I was about to add indeed that the use of seaweed for human or animal consumption has indeed been linked, for the reasons you said, Pierre, with limitation because of the risk of iodine and arsenic mainly, and that has been well described in a publication that has been published in Nutrition Reviews in 2019 that I recommend to the audience. They were saying that it was exactly for these reasons of heavy metals that the functionality based products from seaweed did not, for the moment, grow to their full potential. So as an investor, we would be very interested to any enabling technology or any operating company that actually would increase the access to organic seaweed for the rest of the community.
And Warren, you've been working, on this specific issue, especially with Middle East countries. So, do you think, there is a room also for integrating, having companies fully integrated in the value chain? And how do you anticipate, the needs for cooperation between the farmers, the transformer, the processors, and the bioplastic producers?
Yeah, exactly, Pierre. When we look at the space, we have to look at the entire value chain. This is an early industry. We have been very active with some growers. In the Middle East particularly, but also in Canada. We work with a group, I think Mike's probably watching right now, from Cascadia. Our goal is to work with a Liga as well, and as many of the growers as we can, because if we're going to be investing, let's face it, if we're going to be investing in any of these technologies, they have to have that scalability. This is fundamental. So I think there is room. We believe in investing as a coalition, so we try and find partners to invest with and to advise that can play a role in the coalition, not only in the grow, but in the intellectual property development, in whether it's bioplastics or hydrogen production or food and food-based products. So I'm not sure if I answered your question accurately here.
Yeah. But I think that we will end up, with the final part, because she is from the oil and gas industry, and she plays an important role in the offshore development. You mastered the technology at Total for almost, 50 years. So do you think that a company like Total Venture could take the lead, in this entire value chain integration, because it's important to cultivate, it's important to process, it's important to biorefine, and it's important to produce the polymers. So what role can a fund from an oil and gas company play in this field?
Well, it's true that in oil and gas, we are used to have an integrated model on all over the value chain. We can see that, for instance, for the oil part, we have to secure all the barrel production from the concession with the governments. We are here to produce it, and then we market it in our refineries to sell it at end product in our fuel station. Now, in terms of seaweed, I think that we don't have this expertise internally, and we need today to create this new value chain to work together, all with people specialized in BioMarine, in people specialized in new products. And for that, I think that working with innovative startups will be key, because we don't have this R&D program internally. We also need to work with the brands, I think, because those are the ones who have the market signal from the end consumer, who looks for bio-based products, who are ready to pay a premium for that. And so we are kind of in the middle. We have for sure some expertise in the refineries, but I think that the key challenge for tomorrow would be to work together, and given the high capex that is going to be required, we need to also share the risk with everyone on the value chain.
But you're talking about high capex, but isn't it the role of the industry, because if you develop a polymer and you have the IP and the patents, in this very sector, the role of the company will be to bring innovation to the manufacturer, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So if you pass that to the manufacturer and or to the industry, the capex is not an issue anymore. No?
Yes, I'm not an expert in that field, so we need to have some materials that can be also compliant with the current facility that we have, and so to be sure that we don't need to change all the production facility, and
Correct.
That's also a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I think that most of the startups that are listening to us, they know that reverse engineering is key. and I know that Warren, was very picky on this. We need to adapt, the demand from the industry and the producers, the plastic producer, and go reverse to see what species of algae we need to produce in order to adapt. So I think that, they are working, they're doing quite a good job. And my next question that is linked to this is to Vivek. Vivek, from your previous, experience at Nestle, you've been, going through the different steps, going along with, I'm pretty sure that Guy from Busios is listening to us. So you went from the very initial step to almost, the pre-commercial step. So how did you help, this company to go through the different steps, and what was required, from this industry investment point of view?
Yeah, I think it's in general when you're starting with something completely new, or you're trying to creating a new concept, creating a new category, you need that early hand holding in terms of these accelerator programs, an incubation project, bank also on not just corporates building their accelerator programs, but also regional and local foundations, public foundations, which want to support and create innovation. I mean, as things stand, almost every other than the larger metros, but even the smaller cities across Europe want to be seen as the innovation capital in Europe. So leverage that, and that would be one message to the startups. There is, of course, multiple forums. There are accelerator programs. There is a EU-led EIT and EIT Food, EIT Health, EIT Climate Change. These are multiple options to work for. But I also see, as I said, I'm here in the Copenhagen, Malmo area, last few days, and there's lots of local support available. Both in terms of connecting with academia and research, research labs, facilities being made available, as also public foundations, and then let's say regional banks, which are supporting innovation, and they want to create these clusters where startups can come and benefit. So I think that would be a really good starting point for startups to consider. Where is the technology and the science made available, and what can they leverage? And then, of course, having a corporate partner to look at moving from a lab to a pilot plant, and then with a specific application in mind. That is key. The other thing I would want to say is that when we talk of seaweed-based use as bioplastic in packaging and food, also consider that if it is bio-based and biodegradable, that is the selling proposition. But if it is going to be applied in a food packaging, and you say this is kind of also, there is a certain characteristics that makes it edible, then it is also food. So you have food being, packaging is sold as edible packaging, but then moment you have that proposition, it also means it is also being sold as something which is food, and it requires another set of packaging around it. So keep in mind where the application is. If it's going to be a sachet which will dissolve in something else, then yes, it is working with a food or a seasoning, but it's going to be considered also as a food element. And then it goes back a bit to the regulatory environment. Where would this land up? Is it going to be food contact? Will it be considered food by itself? Or it is for a secondary packaging and it's not going to be in contact with food? Yeah, just some thoughts around this.
Very important point. And we know that seaweed is a perfect ingredient for all the food, the cosmetic, the pharmaceutical industry. So, and Isabelle, you were the one, behind the deal of Naturex sold, to Givaudan. Do you think that there is there are synergies between the ingredient producer, the cultivator, the transformers, and the bioplastic? Can we replicate this type of model, or is it just a side effect and we need to consider that as a standalone potential?
I mean, as it was already said, the convergence between the food industry and the packaging is so intimate that one cannot be separate from the other, and especially when the trend currently is more and more to the bio-based and biosource economy. So for big companies that want to acquire bio-based or biosourced products and smaller companies, the question of how they will formulate it, how they will do the last fill and finish, and how they will, and what packaging do they have for the reaching the B2B aspect of the transportation, and then to the last miles to the consumer. is of great importance. And in the seaweed bioplastic area, it is no different from the other area on that respect.
So we have lots of people listening tonight, and most probably, in the weeks to come, it's going to be viral all over. They know that the investment sector is starting to look at seaweed. They understand that seaweed packaging is linked to the production of seaweed. So what would be the recommendation to the people that are listening if they want to come to you, if they want to present their case? Can you, and whoever wants to start with that, can you give us what will be the most important point from your point of view if you want to pitch if they want to pitch to you? Warren, you want to start?
Sure. Well, I'm very bullish on this space. I love this space. I'm excited about it. I think that this reminds me of working in solar in the early days, and these people sitting around the table today are going to be fundamental in the way that this whole industry pans out. And so all I can say, Pierre, is I'm open right now and trying to be as humble as possible in knowing that there's some really smart people out there developing some pretty cool stuff that we will be surprised of 5 years from now. So I'm super interested in grow. I'm super interested in hydrogen production. That's something that I'm passionate about. I think there's a there. But I'm also interested, obviously, in bioplastics. But what I'm looking for are great management teams who really understand this space and what to do in terms of understanding the whole value chain and where they fit in that value chain, and with a plan to take advantage of that value chain. That to me is everything, because you're right. There's going to be some amazing innovators out there that only are in their little niche, and they don't realize that there's a whole ecosystem out there that needs to be operating efficiently in order for them to be successful to get this to market.
And Sophie.
Yeah, I think we've touched upon some of the things a couple of times now. As Warren mentions, great management team is really, really important, because even when the market is promising and the product is fantastic, startups sometimes fail, and quite a lot of it comes down to the management team and how they handle different challenges as they happen. So definitely a large focus on scalability we've also touched upon, and then I think whether it's in bioplastics, whether it's in biotechnology, nanotechnology, new materials, food products, there's a growing interest from lots of different investors in these topics. Something I would caution is to try to do a little bit of research on the investors before you reach out to them. In my case, I sometimes receive excellent investment opportunities that are outside the geographical area that I can invest in, and there's not much for me to do. I can offer advice, and sometimes maybe some connections if something comes up, but often they'll be better suited figuring out who are regional investors in their area, who are international investors. Also, just make some basic decisions around the capital structure in the company. Which type of investor would you like to see on board? Is it a passive investor or an active investor? Should they come with a specific network? It's a job interview in the way that goes both ways. So investors want the best startups in our portfolio, and entrepreneurs want the best investors that will support them and help them on the journey.
And maybe, I'm going to bounce on this because this is very important. So I understand that you have some vision, and when you're looking, at the company, you have some requirement. But do you consider that this type of very early stage, because we're talking about early stage company, I don't know any company in the field that is very mature and that could fit, as an example, your requirement, Vivek. I don't see, a Series B. It's very early at this stage. But is it a blocking factor on your side, or is it still, something that you will consider with a great potential? And what would be, I would say, the exit strategy that you can envisage, and what would be your recommendation to this startup?
Well, yes, I mean, in terms of the investment mandate that we have, it's really more for more mature companies, for sure. But I think the key criteria we would really look for is the commercial application, the scalability, the defensibility of the intellectual property. Is it something that they can own at least for a period of? Is there a specific application and those paying customers? What is a pipeline of customers who will pick it up, and what application they have that? In terms of exits, I think there are also these kind of larger corporates specializing in packaging, which are also headquartered here in Europe. And then it would really, the thing is, you are a startup, you don't want to start to think like a corporate. But the reality is that if you need to scale up, you also need to have that differentiation. You need to have the bandwidth, the kind of industry game-changing, I wouldn't say experience today, but you should be able to demonstrate that you have what it takes to have the perseverance to be able to scale up from a level 1 to 10, and then from 10 to 100, a 10 times scale up. And then which are the customers that you would be servicing? And then in terms of exits, would you want to sell out and say, it's one of the larger packaging groups, we'll take it. But how are you building those industry networks today in terms of working with converters who are then servicing the final customers? So you need to integrate, don't work in a standalone, don't work on an island by yourself. You need to see the market reality would be where the scale up would come about. And you need to work through partnerships. Both with with industry networks and so on.
I saw your hand,
I will indeed jump on what Vivek just said. I can't more than agree with all what was said, but I will add that it's a matchmaking. So the management team needs to find an investor that actually suits their needs and match their style. And even within a venture capital company, there are different people within the team that have different style and different personal interactions. So the management team shall really choose who's best suited, not only from a hard skills perspective, but also a soft skill. The second aspect is that in addition to making the marketing, how their products and their technology and their platform and their science is good, for all the reasons and the criteria that we have all said for a few minutes, those management team need also to do marketing of their company, and that's something completely different. So having a product that has a good cost of good, that is biodegradable, that has a good access to market, blah, 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 is not the marketing of their company. So they need to be able to elaborate why the financial strategy of their company is the right one. Why raise in equity and not leverage it in debt, or why raise from this country rather than the other? Why raise this amount and then plan to raise again at that timing rather than jumping for a trenched round or a bigger trenched round or whatever? At what time would they exit and on what milestones, etc. So that's the marketing and the positioning of the company. And most of the time, the management team completely forget about this and only focus on the products. And for a successful fundraising and a successful global equity story, this is something that they shall spend more time on and plan earlier on.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. That's excellent, particularly in the space, Isabel. The world is waiting for a solution. It's in the news every day. There's a groundswell of activism investor activism as well. And you're right. You know, the convergence of capital and interest in this space is going to require strong marketing.
Yeah, but having been, you know, an advisor for most of, you know, this young startup, I know that one of their main challenge is dilution, because it's complicated, you know, if you do 1, 2, 3 rounds, you know, to keep the hands on the company. So I've been trying to explain that leadership is very important, and sometimes even if you have a minority shareholding position, you can still run the company. But what would be the recommendation if we want, you know, to explain to this company that we need their product, they need to raise funds? Is it better to go to a family office, to a private equity firm, or, you know, even to consider an IPO without, you know, sales? What will be, you know, the ideal situation? Tui, you want to comment on this? You're mute. Yeah, good.
Yes. Well, for sure, it's not easy because there's a long way to develop their technology at scale. And for us, when it comes to early stage company, I think that the best thing is to come to present their startup, because I think that even if it's early stage and even it doesn't fit our strategy thesis, it's always interesting to meet at first stage to build the trust between the management team and the company, to try to figure out if there are some possibilities to launch a pilot with our R&D. And sometimes, you know, we follow some very young startups from their early years, and we only invest after 2 or 3 years when they reach a milestones. And it's also more secure for us to invest when they have their first revenues and they have a strong pipeline of customers.
Yeah, and this is also a question, you know, that I'm asking all the time. When you talk with investors, depending on the structuring of their LPs and how the fund is structured, they can use some leverage. And Isabel is the best example. Isabel has a portfolio of LP that is just amazing. How can you capitalize on this knowledge, experience to accelerate, to foster, or to support, you know, the development of SMEs? Is it something that counts for you when you invest in a file? You see the potential matchmaking, and you say, oh, I'm gonna relate, you know, this case to this topic or to this LP. Is it something important?
Yes, and it totally relates to the dilution and valuation that we that you just mentioned. Is that in certain circumstances we may not bring the highest valuation to the startup when they're early stage, because indeed there is a part of risk, and because we are co-building the success with them most of the time. But even if we're not the highest valuation, many of them actually like to be financed by our team, because when they go to us, they know that they're gonna be introduced to many different corporates around the planet. So not just in a region where they're based, but corporates from everywhere, every region, in every sector, not only the sector they are in, but also adjacent sectors and things that they may not even have thought of for potential collaborations on the side, while they're focusing for themselves on the proprietary developments. We can help them also to discuss with some retailers or some enabling technology to help their business. And last but not least, most of the companies are very isolated when they're early stage, and most of the management team, especially when they're first time team, they are expecting and they benefit a lot from being in a club of other companies and other management team that have already seen the situation that they can share experience with. So animating kind of a club of the different portfolio companies that we invest in is probably very helpful for young entrepreneurs and young companies.
Well, my next question will be about de-risking this investment, and I'm going to give you the floor, Anne-Sophie. So what do we need, for de-risking this investment? Do they need you to bring you amazing list of offtake? Do they need you to consider upfront licensing? What would be the best option? And Anne-Sophie, you can answer also the previous question.
Yes, I just wanted to add a few points. So it's very different how companies are structured, and it's different which type of routes they should ideally take towards the market. If your startup is scientifically founded and you have research and development, then equity is a very, very expensive way to make your way towards the market. And something that I like to see specifically for scientific startups, so in nanotech, biotech, etc., is a soft funding strategy. Soft funding is fantastic, and it's a government incentive to develop new and better ways of producing materials, food, etc., and it allows an autonomy within the startup that you won't have if you dilute too fast and too soon. So it's I think for R&D intense companies, it's really, really pivotal that they find a good way to balance the soft funding with the hard capital, that being either loan financing for some companies, that's a good way to start, or equity, where you would typically either go to VCs, family offices, etc. So.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that was very helpful, for the companies. And Warren, do you see other ways, to help the companies, to reduce the dilution, at first, or is there any? You're the specialist for upfront licensing. Is it something that we can envisage, and discuss with the industry? And what is the risk? Because if you become exclusive with one big industry player, then you're lost for good.
No, absolutely. So that is the challenge, is balancing that dilution. Startups are funny. I mean, just the other day, one listed on NASDAQ, this electric truck company that is now, the second most valuable IPO in history with no revenues. So there's just this crazy scale out there. And I think that's just a function of the market dynamic, of what the market is willing to bear on the public market side. So just to talk about that, but on the upfront licensing, I think that if you have strong intellectual property and you're going to have to develop these partnerships, like Anne-Sophie said, with governments, getting grants, whatever you can to leverage that. But also with the corporates. If you have the opportunity to work with hand in hand with the corporates and be able to negotiate some type of upfront licensing fee for maybe an exclusivity period, or a niche market, or a geographic region, at least that staves off some of the dilution. I'm a firm believer in it if you can negotiate it. And the market right now, there's the corporates, they want this. We all know it. We have to serve it on a platter, is what we need to do. And part of that is all of us working together with our investees and as co-investors. I think we could really help that out. And I would love to see more blue funds like Isabel. That would be, if we had 10 of those going, that would be nice.
Good. It's almost time to conclude. So I'm going to give you 1 minute each, maybe to send some recommendation to all the young startups that are listening to us in the bioplastic and the other fields. We're going to start with Isabel.
Maybe I would like to share an anecdotal memory of something that happened when I very first started in the venture industry. I remember meeting a Canadian investor, an old veteran of the venture capital, and I was asking what can a venture capital improve, etc. And he said, "Stay humble, be open, and really assess not what you see, but what you could make from the company that you're looking at." And I say I had difficulties to understand really what he said, because I was entering the community. And he said, well, I remember a super young entrepreneur coming to me and explaining to me that he said that he wanted to revolution the way circus were made. And he was super young, he didn't know anything about this, but he had the vision and the ambition that it was feasible. And so I declined the opportunity, and he led the Cirque du Soleil. So from that date, this Canadian investor never judged the book by the cover, and worked with the company that were presenting a case, whether when they were in a good field, whether they can work out a different strategy, a different plan, a different selection of the first prioritized product sometimes, to actually make something out of a good platform in a good field. So that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Isa. Thuy.
Yes, I think that for the startups, I think it's really great to see all those specialized sector funds, because they are going to offer them a huge network when they have a great LP covering all the value chain that they are going to need. In terms of corporate, for ourselves, I think that there are many ways for us to help them, not only the financing from a VC perspective. And so you can see now a lot of acceleration program. You can see also how we can launch some pilots with R&D. We can see also some commercial agreements. And so don't hesitate to come to see us, whatever the stage you are, because we try to find the good entry point in our organization, so that we can find a fit.
Excellent. Vivek.
Yeah, a lot has been said. So I think really follow the lead of smart money, build your networks, don't hesitate to pivot. You know, what you started off with in terms of your own vision, where the thing would lead, what application it would be, even which geography you are starting with. You know, I just mentioned, since you had spoken a bit about Key and Visios moving out from Norway, they're now in Switzerland. They have the public foundation supporting them. They have a large corporate partner. They have a specific application, and they won one big award just a week back with the Mars Challenge, which is pan-European. So that was really fantastic. But yeah, it's really this build the network, use smart money. There is more than, you know, real diluting your equity at an early stage. It's about building different models for collaboration, whether it's an R&D license, it's a specific application for a specific geography, licensing out, and leverage your network. Really, that's for me is a key aspect at this stage.
Thank you, Vivek. And Sophie.
My former entrepreneur experience comes up in me when I hear these types of questions. I would always caution that bootstrap for as long as possible, because getting investors on board, it's a little bit like a marriage. Once you're in it, it's not easy to get out of, and you want to make sure that the people you bring on board and give out ownership of parts of your company to are someone that, you know, in a tight situation are going to support and help you and you know, move the company where you need to be, and not someone who's going to be working against you all the time. So make a plan and figure out when to take investors on board, and make sure that you pick the right ones. Build the network and get to know the right type of people. Figure out who to take on board. Don't treat investors like doorbells. You just ring them and then money falls out. It's a terrible way to build your business.
I must agree, you know, because I've been married, you know, for 36 years, and it's a permanent discussion back and forth, you know, to find the best agreement. But I agree that it's also fun, and you know, it's quite unusual these days, you know, to remain married. Warren, you have the final word.
The final word. That's excellent. Okay, we've heard a lot of what's important, but I always go back to listen. I'm an entrepreneur. I have my own companies beyond the investing side and the capital side. there's one thing that I see in successful entrepreneurs, and that's stubbornness. Stick it out and go hard. You know, Amazon went to 100 investors who all said no before they got their first million. So, you know, not everybody, not all of us investors see the vision. Some of us just don't do it. And that's the way it is. You will find somebody who will find and see your vision and want to collaborate and make it happen. So that's my final word.
Thank you, Warren. I thank you all because I know that it's getting late, and I'm pretty sure that your son, you know, will be angry at this time. So we're gonna release you and thank you again for that. The next big meeting talking about Seaweed will be in June. I don't know when exactly, but Seaweed Around the Clock this year is going to be 24 hours live. We're going to go from Tahiti to Hawaii, and we're going to go, you know, in different parts of the world to see what the seaweed industry is able to achieve. So I hope that you guys will be part of this, and I look forward to, you know, to welcoming you to the Seaweed Around the Clock. And of course, if there are demands that you can't, you know, accept because you're busy, I will manage to redirect you the calls, you know, from the attendees directly to you. Thank you so much, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.